على كل شيء قدير. So welcome one and all to the final lesson of this course, lesson 12, summary and Q&A. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, as we've seen in this book, this is the our 100 level course, right? Our absolute introduction. This is where you start. This is one step of many. There's many details, many discussions. We have not got into certain whole topics of the deen. We haven't got into marriage, haven't got into trade, haven't got into had punishments, haven't got into divorce, custody, inheritance, blood money, politics, countless discussions of fiqh. Right, there's many discussions we haven't even touched upon. Many details we haven't even touched upon. So it is the one step of many. So this is supposed to be our launch pad. This is where we begin and get our absolute basics so that we go forward. And as we have seen in this course, we have looked at Islam and Iman and Ihsan. Right? So who can remind us what we mean by Islam? Islam is obviously our religion in general, but what do we specifically mean by Islam? Imran, can you remind us? Omar? Good, the 5 pillars. So are these things that you do with your body or things that you do with your heart? Right, your limbs, you do this and you do that. Right, as Imam al-Laqani says, وَالْإِسْلَامَ اشْرَحَنَّ بِالْعَمَلِ, and it says when you're asked about what do you mean by Islam, it means the things that you do. Right, the things that you do, bil-amal, amal, things that you do with your bodies. Right, technically speaking, we would include kibr as an action, but what we mean is the outside body. Okay, what about Iman? What part of our body do we use to do Iman? Obviously, we express our Iman in the way that we deal with other people, and we express our Iman in the way that we feel, and it ultimately comes to our heart. But what is the limb of the body that we use to do our Iman? Your heart is essential to Iman, that's true. But Iman is about what you know, right? What you know as a fact. So that's with your brain, right? The intellect with your brain, right? With your brain. And Ihsan is with which side? Which limb of our body? Which part of our body? Our soul and heart, right? So this is the 3 things that we're looking at. What is in your head? What is in your body? What is in your heart? Right? So we spoke about the basic fundamentals of our Iman. Simple things, right? So where do we go next? We're going to study this as a course by itself. Right? We're going to study this as a course by itself. We're going to study Iman as a course by itself, which is called Aqidah or Kalam, right? Aqeed about our beliefs, kalam about how we talk about, and theology, right? How we talk about that thing and explain our Iman, right? And we're going to study fiqh, right? So when we're going to go into a fiqh book next, to be like, hey, this fiqh book doesn't talk about our creed, as if that doesn't matter, or doesn't talk about being a good person, doesn't talk about being about watching out for pride, because why? It's a specific topic now, right? So we're going to specialize, we're going to study something specifically in fiqh, the details of what you do with your body. And we're not really going to talk about your heart. And then we're going to have another topic which is only about what's in your head, and we're not really going to talk about what you do with your body. And then we're going to have another topic and another book and another science which we're going to focus on how you are inside. And so somebody will be confused. They say, oh, This Shaykh, all he seems to talk about is your heart, as if he means it doesn't matter what you do with your body. Well, this Shaykh, all he talks about is mental things. It seems very dry and boring, as if he doesn't care about something else. No, this is specialization, right? Today we're talking about tectonic plates. Obviously, we're not going to talk about politics, because tectonic plates are one thing and politics something else. But this is called specialization, right? So when we study the deen, this is al-Risala, al-Jami, it's put everything together. But when we study the deen, we're studying one of these three things. And then in reality, we're going to study other things as well, right? So in Islam, when we're talking about Islam, we're going to study fiqh. And we need to study more fiqh, right? When we study Iman, we're going to study Aqidah and Kalam, right? We need to study more of these things. And the big homework in our life is ihsan, because the other two are quite easy, right? You don't really have to be even a Muslim to understand fiqh, right? My friend had a Hanafi Mufti who was a non-Muslim, right? Hanafi Mufti who was a non-Muslim. Liked fiqh, thought it's cool, understood all the rules, understood all the systems, mashallah, but he wasn't even a Muslim, right? And Iman, you might be into philosophy, and you might find all these things really interesting, and you might have a PhD in this, but ihsan, you can't do ihsan unless it's not a science. So it's not about facts, it's not about categories, it's about being something, right? So one of my teachers, he said, Alhamdulillah, I never read a single book in ihsan, meaning it's not about theory, it's all about being, right? And this is our big homework, Ya Rab. So the point is, we're going to go to our next step, right? And we're going to go into sections, but we need to always remember, okay, remember that course that I took where everything was in one book, okay? Because all of these things are essential, right? Even though they've turned into different disciplines, right? Does that make sense, everybody? Imran, Omar, Saadiya, Amir? Right? Who can tell me something, another science that we might study? Something completely different to these things. It's not fiqh, and it's not aqidah, and it's not what we call tasawwuf or ihsan or tazkiyat al-nafs. Hadith. Good. Arabic language. Right, and hadith as well, there's different things we can study in hadith. We can study the hadith itself. What does this hadith mean? Right? And hadith then, when you read hadith, you're going to obviously understand from it Islam, and you're going to understand from it Iman, and understand from it Ihsan, right? So you can read the hadith itself, like reading Riyad al-Salihin, reading Sahih Muslim, reading the book itself. What else could we do in hadith? Right, looking at hadith criticism, how we critique hadith, right? So again, you might go and study, and the course that you're doing is hadith criticism. How do we critique hadiths? How do you find out if they're true or not? Right, but where does that fit under? Ultimately, you're trying to critique a hadith, learn the principles of critiquing hadith in order to actually critique hadith, in order to actually find out what the Prophet ﷺ meant, in order to come to Islam, Iman, Ihsan. So these are the fruits. Islam and Iman, Ihsan is the fruits of all Islamic sciences. Tafsir, same thing. Right? You're doing the same thing. And then there's various steps before that, what's called the ancillary disciplines, al-ulum al-musanida or ulum al-ala, like Arabic grammar. It's not really a religious science anyway. Right? There's a modern Christian, for example, who wrote a book on Arabic grammar. So it's nothing really to do with the religion itself, but it's useful. Philosophy, for example. Philosophy, studying philosophy, helps you understand the mind, which helps you understand discussions, which helps you understand creed, which helps you... It's a useful science, philosophy. But it's not a religious science per se. Grammar, logic, history, right? But these are all things that Muslims study because they're useful to the whole job of trying to find out what do we do with our body, what do we believe, and how we should be as people. Okay? So everything comes back to these 3 points. Jazakumullah khair. right? And so why do we ask, for many reasons, why do we ask this question of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why do we ask Allah, I don't know how many times, at least 17 times a day, Ihdina as-sirata mustaqim, guide us the straight path? Because number one, we need to be guided, and number two, we are on what are we on? We are all on a journey, right? We're on a path, we're on a journey, we're going somewhere. So that means you start somewhere and you end somewhere else, right? This is a very common feeling that people, converts for example, converts or extremists or whatever it is you feel, you get caught into a bubble where you feel you're not going anywhere. It seems really weird, like the way of thinking has kind of like, you're like, okay, this is it. Islam means you just pray the fard. And if you can't focus, Allah will forgive you. So no, you're on a journey. We're all on a journey, meaning we're starting from zero and we start going forward. We've done this book, but then we need to keep going, right? In our own practice and our own work on ourselves and in our own understanding of the deen, right? And so many people, when they start studying the deen, like myself, for example, they get really into it. It's really, really important, right? And it's cool, actually, like you like it, right? Maybe someone like Imran, for example, he's studying, he's a young guy, he's studying, it's fun now, it's kind of cool. Like, I like studying fiqh, you like studying these things, it's kind of interesting, right? Maybe you're just being forced, but who knows, right? But some people are like, they like this kind of stuff, right? So you get into it because your nafs likes it, okay? And then you realize it's not that fun after all, it's quite serious, and you realize some of it's really important, some of it's not so important, right? And to be honest, classically, traditionally, we didn't need everybody to study so much deen because there were enough ulama around to just keep the deen going, right? In today's world, that's not the case. Particularly now in coronavirus, the last 2 years, it's extremely concerning how many of the great ulama are passing away. Extremely concerning. That there is this kind of like last generation of scholars, and then now we're like, we're meeting the future, and it's very, very concerning, right? So, unless you're working 12 hours a day trying to pay your rent, seriously considering putting serious time, sit down with your parents, sit down with your wife and say, listen, this is a thing that we need to do in life. Like, we need to be tullab al-ilm, because things don't just, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, lillahi fi khalqihi shu'un, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always running the show and has amazing things happening. Allah will preserve this deen to the end of time, no question. But at the same time, we have to look at what's happening in the world right now and see ourselves, as somewhat analogous or even worse than the Mongol invasion, right? The sacking of Baghdad, everything ended in the east basically with the Mongols. They wiped out 1/5 of the world's population, killed tons of ulama, destroyed libraries, and then they were about to come into Egypt, and then the Muslims made their final stand, right? And they go into the battlefield saying, Wa Islama, oh woe unto Islam, this is the end of it. The Mongols are going to come through Egypt, and that's it. What's going to be left, right, of Muslims? And there's nothing going to be left called Islam. And then alhamdulillah, they won, but they lost Central Asia basically. And alhamdulillah, things came back after that. Mongols became Muslim, but that's where we are right now. Wa Islama, right? Wa Islama, woe is Islam, woe unto Islam, because we're in a very, very concerning situation where we have to, alhamdulillah, we've started, and may Allah reward all of you and give you all tawfiq to start, but we need to keep going. And it's almost, it's getting to the stage where it's almost personally obligatory for all of us to take up this banner and become tullab al-ilm and study Arabic properly, study fiqh properly, hadith, everything. Not because it's interesting, not because it's gratifying, not because one day I'm going to become a shaykh and I'll be able to do this class online and people listen to me. Just because institutions across the world are falling apart, the ulama are dying, and we have to take the practical means to keep this religion going. If we don't plant the seeds, no trees will grow. Right? That's the principle, right? And it's all about people who change the trend, change the mentality, right? We can go out for a kebab tonight, or we could all sit down for 2 hours and study deen, right? There's a time for this and time for that, but sometimes things are so dire that really we don't have that much time. We don't have that much time. You know, I can say for myself, somebody who, you know, is a student of knowledge or was a student of knowledge, it's really hard. And I've taken one, you know, if you say how far have I gone in fiqh, or how far have I gone in hadith, or how far, it's like, you know, 10%, 5%. It took me 13 years, 14 years. And so it's hard. You know, we have to plant the seeds, otherwise there won't be any oak trees tomorrow, right? And maybe we can have somebody who knows about biology or statistics. How many acorns have to hit the ground for there to be oak trees in the future, right? Quite a few number, right? You need to have a lot of acorns at least hitting the ground, so that then there's at least, let's say, 1% actually goes into the ground, and let's say 1% of that then actually grows, and then 1% of that actually becomes an oak tree. So there's a whole ecosystem that everyone else can thrive off. That's what it's like. The squirrels and the aphids and the birds that live off that oak tree, that's what it used to be. The squirrel doesn't have to think about oak trees. He just knows enough about how to climb, and that's it. That's what it was like in the past. There's enough ulama around that there's alhamdulillah. You should know your basics and just focus on your worship. It was easy, not a problem. But what happens when you cut all the oak trees down? Now the aphids and the robin and the squirrel has to start thinking, hang on a minute, are my kids going to have an oak tree to climb on? Because it takes a long time for an oak tree to grow. So he needs to start thinking now, hang on a minute, where are the acorns? What's going to happen? Right? We need to think, we need to be, you know, there's a time for tawakkul ala Allah, right? Or a realm for tawakkul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in charge of everything, that's true, but there's also a time for, you know, a time for, or a place for our own himmah and our own resolve, right? And we need to do that, right? And I think it was Shaykh Abdul Rahman al-Shahuri, he said, ففي محضر التصريف, I think it was محضر, وفي حضرة التصريف كنا عوادما وفي مقتضى التكليف قمنا له صفا. He says, when it came to the issue of tasrif, actually controlling the world and actually cause, event, effect, and doing this and doing that, and preserving the sacred sciences and becoming ulama, kunna awadim, and we didn't even exist. We're not there at all. That's not our realm at all. We're not in charge of the end results. We're not in charge of that. We're not responsible for when the hour comes and when knowledge is raised. We're not in charge of that. It's not a problem. Kunna awadim, and we're not even there. وفي مقتضى التكليف, when it comes to the issue of what Allah has asked us to do, قمنا له صفا, we stood up in rows to obey Him, right? And so there's a time for tawakkal ala Allah, and Allah's okay, Allah's in charge. There's also a time for, hey, we need to think about things and be very, very careful, because we almost, you know, it's quite dire, right? The issue is quite dire. May Allah, you know, forgive us all, and you know, there's no time for the extra. We just have to focus on, you know, what is important, and we can't just rely on other people doing it. It doesn't necessarily happen. And this is somebody, you know, I work with muftis, and you go and ask them the questions, they don't necessarily know the answers. They don't necessarily have 25 amazing students who will know the answer tomorrow morning. It's not like that, right? And so the whole standard is going down the drain. The whole institutions are going down the drain. The ulama are dying, and things are quite dire. Okay, so we need to, inshallah, you know, again, consider yourself, you are the squirrel who's just worked out that there might not be an oak tree tomorrow, and he's going to start doing something that his grandparents never had to do, which is planting acorns and making sure that they grow and making sure water gets there and all these things, right? Khair, inshallah. Okay, so any questions or queries? If you can hear that, my cat is trying to break in here. He's a very social guy. Whenever he hears something, he wants to be in the same room. So he's now trying to scratch the door down. Just because he knows something's happening in here. Any questions or queries? Amir, Imran, Omar, Shahid, Saadiya. No, I wouldn't advise to that. The next text up is Safinat al-Najah. That would be good to memorize. Yeah. The most important thing is you should be in a lesson, right? Don't think, sometimes you take on missions that are too impossible, and just say, no, just make sure you keep studying, right? So don't look, okay, what should I memorize? See what course should I do next, right? 1 to 5 hours a week of lessons, right? One, if you're just, I can't do it, I have kids, I have work, I just can't do it. Like myself, it's very difficult for me to study, right? I've got work, I've got things, it's hard, right? And so to have the time, to have that balance. So the most important thing is, what's my next course I'm going to do? And if you have more time, what the next course is I'm going to do, right? And how can I learn Arabic? MashaAllah, the Arabic program is going strong as well with on Seekers now. So MashaAllah, that's an option as well. 1 or 2 or 3 courses you're doing, especially Arabic, trying to do something realistic, right? But again, you need to do it in a realistic way. So we have to think like it's not a romantic thing. It's kind of like, how can I do it? Okay. Oh, I can't do it because my work. Okay, can I change my work? Realistically. Can I change, my family responsibilities? Can we sit down as a family and think about something we can do together? For example, that would solve this problem, right? We need to think practically and realistically, right? Does falling asleep during prayer break the wudu? So it's no difference, prayer or not prayer. It's not a significant shaheed. It's the issue of, are you falling? So if you fell asleep in tashahhud and you were firmly seated on your behind, then you wouldn't break your wudu. If you fell asleep in sujood or while standing, it would break your wudu. And if you're not sure that you fall asleep or not. So I've done that myself, I've fallen asleep in tashahhud. It was really weird. I was sitting there, I was thinking, when's the tashahhud going to end? Like, it seemed like I'd been there for ages. And then I looked right and left and everybody had left the mosque. So I had fallen asleep before even giving salams. So what I had to do is give salam, finish my tashahhud. I didn't know if I'd done my tashahhud or not, so I did my tashahhud, give salams, and that's it. So what should we do if during the prayer we forget how many rak'ahs we have? So there's 2 answers. Number 1, you assume the less and you build from that. So you're like, I can't remember 1, I know I've done 1, so I either done 2 or 3. So you're going to say, I'm assuming the least, so I've done 1, and you're going to build from that. And then at the end of the prayer, before you give salams, you can do 2 sujood as-sahw and then give salams. Okay? Another practical thing though is if this is a common thing, you have a problem, then what you do is you do different adhkar in different rak'ahs. So for example, you would say, for example, I'm going to do, every single time I'm in my first rak'ah, I'm going to say Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbil A'la 3 times. In my second and fourth, I say Subhan Rabbil A'la 5 times. Right? Or I'm going to do this dua. There's many du'as of sujood. I'm going to do this dua in this rak'ah, in the first and third rak'ahs, and that dua, another dua in the third and fourth rak'ah. Right? Or in Sami Allahu alhamda rabbana lakal hamd min as-samawati wa min al-ardi wa min ma shi'ta min shay'in ba'd. I'll do that in the first and third. And Sami Allahu alhamda Hamdan kathiran tayyib mubarakan fi in the fourth and fifth, for example. Second and fourth, sorry. Right. So the point is, you're playing around with these different adhkar to help you remember. So would your prayer still be valid for? Yeah, because falling asleep doesn't break the prayer. What would you advise if the devil whisperings is heavily affecting one's worship? So one or two things. Number one, learn your fiqh. because in things you don't have fiqh, you don't know what to do, right? 'Cause sometimes it's like, I just didn't know the ruling, so obviously like I don't even know if I have to do this or not, right? I don't even, So I'm like, oh, I'm not going to go to school. Okay, why can't I go to school? Oh, because in school I know I'm going to see a woman's awra, so therefore it's haram for me to go there. It's like, is that the fiqh? Like, I don't know. So I don't know, am I being OCD or not? I'm not sure. So number one, just keep studying fiqh. Number two, hang out with people who are religious, like your dad, right? You're like, oh, you ask your dad, do you do this? He's like, no, I didn't even think about that. You're like, oh, okay. So just comparing what you do against other people, right? Number three, it's now clear that you have OCD proper, right? Meaning it doesn't make sense. So what you're doing is, you have some people, it's like very, very difficult. They will be trying to say Allahu Akbar the whole time. They're saying Allahu Akbar. And then they know they said it correctly, but then they keep telling themselves that they didn't say it correctly. So they're there for 2 hours saying Allahu Akbar. And then you just ask them, oh, how's it going? And they're like, and you're talking to them, oh, subhanAllah, Allahu Akbar, that's crazy. They say Allahu Akbar, it's like, that's a very normal thing to say. You know you can say it properly, yet you're telling yourself you can't. That means there's some kind of like minor psychosis there, like it doesn't make sense. So you know you are going around in circles, or you know that your hands are pure and everything's pure, but you keep having to wash everything. Why? So you know it doesn't make sense up here, but somewhere else there's a misconnection. So that means probably you should go to a counselor, right? Because it could be like that, right? Sometimes it could be whatever, genes. Some people are like that. It's okay. You're not insane, but it's just some people have OCD like that. And then it's an issue of just having a healthy balance with it. Sometimes you're just going to be like that the whole life, and that's just how you are. But you need to just get a balance, right? Like one of my friends, he's a psychiatrist. He said here, I don't know if everybody would agree, but he said hearing voices is not a problem. Like if every day there's a person who speaks to you in your head, it doesn't even matter. The issue is your healthy relationship with that. So having OCD is not a problem. It might just be how you are, or whatever it is, right? But the issue is that balance. Do you continue to give into that thing? And then it takes over your life, and then it ruins your life, right? So number one, just see what everyone else does and do what they do, right? See another religious Muslim, what do they do? And that's the easiest thing. And you just kind of contextualize things and just see things become reasonable. Study, find out what's going on. But if you genuinely have a problem, like this is a huge problem. Like it takes me 2 hours to pray every single time I pray, and I know it doesn't make sense, but I just cannot get over it. Then you need to go and see a counselor, because you have a problem, right? And that's okay. It's okay to have a problem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives different people different problems. Some people have cancer. Some people have these funny kind of mental things. Some people have anxiety. Some people have all sorts of things. Happens. Right? It doesn't mean you're insane. It just means you're different, and everybody's different. If you missed, should I give that advice to people who have bad wasawis? Depends. I wouldn't necessarily tell everybody go and see a counselor, because they might think, oh my God, you're labeling me as insane, because people don't know what that means. So it depends. You've got to judge who you're talking to. I don't know. If you miss witr prayers when you follow the Hanafi school, but now you follow the Shafi school, do you have to make up the witr prayers? You should, right? Unless you have other prayers to make up, you should make them up. Is your prayer valid if you said Allahu Akbar in a silent voice, but your tongue is moved to make the words? No, it's not. So, no, like this. I didn't make a sound. You have to say Allahu Akbar. It's not valid. I think it's valid in the Maliki school. You can check with the Maliki, I'm not sure. Right? I'm pretty sure in the Maliki school, for their qira'ah, when they recite the Fatiha, they just have to move their lips. They don't actually have to make a sound. But for us, we have to actually make a sound. Okay. Any other questions or queries? Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Amir. Okay, do we have any other questions? Can you just type yes or something if you have any other questions. Otherwise, we'll conclude inshallah ta'ala. Okay, Imran has a question. Is there a Shafi fiqh song to teach kids? I don't know. So honestly, all these the manzumas, right? These kind of poems that they memorize, all of these could be done in they have better tunes. The problem is a lot of them have are on rajas, which is kind of boring in itself, right? But like a lot of these songs, you can make things out. I'm trying to think. You can make songs out of them. But you don't really have to for kids, right? So if you're trying to make fuqaha, fine. You're like, I want my kid to memorize the Alfiyat al-Zubad, right? 1,000-line poem Shafi fiqh. Okay. If that's your goal, then all you have to do is just make a tune up for it. Right? But otherwise, for kids, is that important? For kids, it's just like focus on practical things, right? Allahu Akbar. Where can you find positions of other schools in case of hard issues? When you have a hard issue, ask your teacher. That's a simple thing. Have a teacher in fiqh, and when you have a hard issue, ask your teacher. Right? Don't go and study another madhab. That's a bad idea. Right? You can obviously contact a sheikh from the Hanafi school or Maliki school or Hanbali school, fine. But the issue here is what? The issue is don't go and study another madhab. That's not a good idea. I don't advise that at all. Stick to one madhab, study it properly. So I'm not sure exactly. If you look on the seekers, if you look on the seekers courses, I think there is a course next Bafadl, I believe. The Mukhtasar Latif, I think. If you look on the website, there's many other courses. So this is like a 100 level course, like under any other 100 level course to do that. I'm not sure exactly. Does anybody have the link to the website where they have all the courses? And so I think Sheikh, who is it? What's his name? Qasim? No, Sheikh. Forget his name now. Kar, Sheikh Muhammad Kar, is it? He's teaching a class, I believe, on Shafi. I think that's the next class up. But generally, we work in levels, right? So you want to do like, this is super introductory. So then there's introductory level fiqh, proper. And then introductory level aqidah, proper. And then introductory level tasawwuf, proper. Or introductory level hadith, you work on a level. Hadith, right? And then you go to the next level. Quran, hadith, right? You do something, balanced. Because what happens is if you don't, like if you just do fiqh, and then you never study anything else, it's not balanced, it doesn't make sense. I remember I got told off from one of my teachers. I was teaching this girl one-on-one. I was teaching her nahu, and then I was going to do balagh, I was going to do this. He said to me, why are you doing that? You're ruining her. Because the brain is working in one particular way and it's not balanced. Right? Seerah, for example, is very different to fiqh. Fiqh is very different to aqidah. Aqidah is very different to grammar. Grammar is very difficult to rhetoric. Rhetoric is very different to history. Everything's different. It makes a balance. Right? So all of these things are important. Right? So your fiqh and your aqidah, these are kind of the main things we study. But then also Arabic and all of it makes the complete picture. Right? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, khair, inshallah. We'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. Subhanallah bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.